birthday comes to you.
Trip me out again. This is the first time I've taken LSD in years. Yes, that's the last thing I heard after coming out from the backstage. Backstage is a very worldly place. Lots of smoking, drinking, smut written all over the walls. Some of the most off-color jokes I've heard since I got out of the Coast Guard. I did hear a good one, though, that I can tell here. It's a riddle, actually. Let's see if you can get it. What do you get when you put your fingers into President Johnson's ears? You give up? You get President Johnson's wax. Well, you know, just last month I was blessed with the privilege of teaming up with renowned gospel artist Hal Kiakoya, better known as the Hallelujah Hawaiian. Now, over the last 20 years or so, Hal has released 37 gospel albums full of reworked Christian favorites, offering the believer an alternative to the secular Hawaiian music. And Hal and I were the guests of honor at Women's Retreat at Mount Hermon. And Women's Retreat is a celebration of the family, really. It's where we men speak to the women about how they can best glorify the Lord by glorifying their family. Or at least certain members of it, right, guys? But Hal had a great testimony. And I'm sure those of you who've listened to such radio programs as Focus on the Family and the Back to the Bible broadcast have heard Hal's testimony. Hal speaks a lot about the seamier side of the Hawaiian music industry. Now, you may have heard that a good share of the Hawaiian music is inspired by nitrous oxide, or the Hawaiian punch, as it's referred to in the biz. And many of these Hawaiian songwriters and composers utilize the nitrous oxide. And many of you may know that nitrous oxide goes directly to work on the part of the brain called the cerebral cortex. And recently, a lot of the Christian scientists have, well, not that kind of Christian scientist, you know what I mean, but scientific Christians have found that there's a direct link between the cerebral cortex and morality. So, is it any wonder that Hawaii has been the first state to turn its back and launch an attack on traditional Christian values? The values that were put in place by our founding fathers, our original moral leaders. George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Ronald Reagan. Hal came to the Lord in 1970, and his autobiography, Under My Palm Hula Luau, was released in 1985, but even today it is very worthwhile reading. It's one of those books that you just can't pick up with and look at. I guess you can pick up any passage and you'll be spiritually enriched just by looking at the words. And I think I'm going to do that right now. Oh yes, here's a good passage. This is Hal speaking. I left my hotel just before sunrise, my tired body calling out for that nitrous rush. Entering the local market, I grabbed a basket and headed for the dairy case. My heart began to pound as my eyes looked onto the neat rows of bargain brand aerosol non-dairy whip before me. Without thinking, I dropped my basket and swept up as many cans of the hydrogenated industrial compound as I could carry, and made a beeline for the checkout stand. The beautiful young cashier greeted me with a warm smile. I studied her closely as she rang up my purchase. She looked vaguely familiar to me. In the course of conversation, it became clear as to why, for the young brown-skinned native was none other than Constance Kiowahi, the former hula queen and pitch girl for Shell Gasoline's Hula Dollars campaign. I quietly blushed in shame as I recalled the deviant fantasies I had conjured up after viewing these racy promotional ads. As she began bagging my excessive purchase, she jarred me out of my semi-stupor with the inquiry I dreaded the most. "What are you going to do with all that whipped cream?" In order to save face, I fibbed that I would use it as a topping for my famous Belgian waffles. Now this followed a night of intense snorting, and my post-nitrous fog was beginning to lead me into a cycle of poor decision-making. You see, despite the fact that the only waffles I'd ever dished up were from my toaster, I somehow ended up with a breakfast date. Belgian waffles at my place in an hour. Thank God I blasphemed in vain to myself for room service. In my sinister mind, I plotted how I would skate through this ordeal and jump this unsuspecting checker to indulge myself in acts of shameful fornication. Little did I know that Constance had recently come to know the Lord and had other plans for me. When the big moment arrived and Constance entered my door, the waffles were ready, awaiting their foamy garnishment. I excused myself and turned to retrieve a fresh can of whip from the refrigerator. Constance, both eager and helpful, grabbed a spent can I had left on the counter during the previous night's binge and went to work. When I turned around, the waffles were covered with a runny veil of creamy glop. Constance looked me in the eye knowingly. I had been found out. Well, we'll stop there because we don't have time to go over what happened in that luxurious hotel room that day. But I do have time to tell you that Hal fell to his knees before the Lord and was immediately delivered from noxious propellants. And we can thank one little Hawaiian girl and the fine folks at Shell Gasoline for Hal's conversion. You know, it's deep caring and love for the undeserving that separates the believer from the non-believer. And who else but a God-fearing believer could so meticulously separate the sinner from the sin? Who else but a Bible-believing Christian could so love the sinner and hate their sin and care enough to tell them so? Which brings us to the next portion of our show. As you know, it's vacation Bible school time. Well, it's right around the corner anyway. And our puppet ministry from Faith Fellowship is joining us here this evening. And they're stepping out of character to present their message of love and caring for all of you here this evening. Now, turning to our first guest, he's a veteran announcer.